Okay, it's 3 o'clock. The inquiry is resumed. Miss Nevin, would you like to start your cross-examination? I've also just inadvertently shut every single tab that had open in Adobe, so you'll have to just bear with me while I get Bruce back up.
If it helps, I think the only extra documents I'll be going to beyond Mr. Sensecall's are Councillor Crabtree's evidence. If you have that, we should be. Right.
Sorry. I have, yes. I've got Councillor Crabtree's proof and I've got my proof.
And the development plan as well, if we need it. Thanks.
Sorry.
Not at all. Good afternoon, Mr. Sensecall.
Good afternoon.
We're nearly there now. I think we're all that separates us from conditions on section 106.
Can't wait. Yes.
So just to preface before we get started, of course, ma'am, we don't undertake a planning balance as part of our evidence, but of course you will be doing this exercise. And so what I intend to explore with Mr. Sensecall are the issues important to our evidence, and to look at the way Mr. Sensecall gives to those and what our position is on that. So that's how I intend to take the evidence. So going through the issues then, just starting on the effect of the proposal and openness and purposes of the green belt. That's something we touch on quite briefly in our evidence, and I've raised some points on that in chief with Councillor Crabtree. Just I have nothing further to add on that point to what the council, Mr. Bird, has already raised in his questions, insofar as that touches on our evidence. So then moving to issue B then, the RUR4. Again, some of the points I intended to put on that have already been raised by Mr. Bird on the extent to which the effectiveness of the policy depends on formal designation and agreement on the extent of the uses occurring on site. So I endorse those questions. I don't tend to go over that. One point in addition I wanted to run by you, Mr. Sensecall, on RUR4 is in relation to paragraph 8.58 of your proof.
Yes.
So this is where you say that there would be no loss of outdoor recreational space or country park because neither presently exists on the appeal site, and you caveat that then by saying outside of the public right of way. So just recalling Councillor Crabtree's evidence on the permissive paths, you'll recall in chief, Councillor Crabtree discussed the fact that her evidence is that the extent of the permissive paths goes beyond what the appellant has put forward, and she spoke to this with reference to Appendix D of her proof of evidence, and that's CD 13-200. It's PDF page 27.
I've got the hard copy here.
The hard copy, let me see if I can, I think it's page 9.
Yes, I've got that.
And you'll recall that Councillor Crabtree discussed what the appellant was putting forward in terms of the extent of the paths, and you talk about the one public right of way, and saying that this map actually records a greater extent of permissive routes on site. Just check, you don't dispute, do you, that these permissive routes are being used now on plot 4, do you?
I don't dispute.
That these routes are being used by people currently on plot 4.
I don't dispute that. Yeah, I mean, when we did the site visit, correctly, three weeks ago, we did walk some of those routes.
Okay, so just to clarify then, in relation to paragraph 8.58, it's not correct then, is it, to say that there is no recreational space existing on the site outside of the public right of way? given that we've agreed that these routes are also being used?
Well, they're permissive paths. So I accept that the permissive paths are being used.
And that those are that's recreational space.
I suppose they are being used for a recreational purpose, yes.
Then on 8.59 of your proof, next paragraph down, you discuss what you refer to as the improved new, important new and improved links to and through the appeal site, and you give this, you refer to this down further in that paragraph as a significant benefit. So your evidence is that you attach significant weight to the creation of what you say are new routes. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you'll recall Councillor Crabtree's evidence, and we've looked at the routes that are being used. And Councillor Crabtree disputes the newness of these routes and that they're a benefit as they are already existing. And so my question is, if the inspector agrees with Councillor Crabtree's evidence that these wouldn't be new routes because they're already being used, that would reduce the level of weight to that benefit down from significant if they're already in existence, in fact.
Subject to the surfacing of them, that how accessible they are. I mean, again, when we went to site 2 or 3 weeks ago, some of these routes are they're not all very well trodden, as it were. So I think what flows from the development, if it comes, is more definition. And other improvements to the environment around those routes. So I think what I say still holds good.
But just in terms of I hear what you say about improvement, but just referring to the extent of the newness, it would be open to the inspector to agree that these aren't new paths, caveat what you say about improvement, but that they're already being used.
It would be open to the inspector to come to a view based on the evidence she's heard from both parties.
And so then on a similar point at 8.62 of your proof, you refer to these provisions, the improvements and the additional routes that you discussed as assisting the council's core objective of providing recreational space within the RU4 allocation. And again, you give that significant weight. So a similar point, but if the inspector agrees with the Rule 6 parties case that the site is already performing this function, it would be open to her to reduce the weight to any benefits from recreational provision as part of the film studio. That is a reasonable position the inspector could take.
So when you say the site, what do you mean by the site?
The appeal site.
Sorry, but what elements of the appeal site are you suggesting are currently in use, other than the permissive paths you talked about? Is that all you're talking about?
Yes, the areas in recreational use on the appeal site.
Right.
Exactly.
So again, it's the same answer applies the last time.
Yes. Then moving on to main issue E, the effect on the surrounding road network. If we could turn up policy DM33, please.
Could you give me a PDF number?
Yes, it is 271.
Okay, thank you.
The part I'd like to focus on is part E of that, and it's the provision for providing sufficient parking to meet the needs of future occupants and ensure there is no significant adverse impact from overspill parking. So if we take the question of overspill parking first, you also refer to, of course, the MPPF framework on this, paragraph 8152 of your proof about residual cumulative impacts on the road network. And so then in line with that policy of the local plan and the MPPF, the inspector, I think we can agree, will need to consider the parking implications of the appeal scheme.
Yes, she will, and she's heard a significant amount of evidence on that from Mr. Dix, our transport witness.
And she'll need to consider whether the parking provision will be enough and whether there will be any harm from overspill parking into the surrounding areas.
She will have to consider that, and she's heard evidence on those points again from Mr. Dix.
Yes, and obviously from our evidence, the question of whether the appeal scheme will provide enough on-site parking is a key concern for us. And you've heard our evidence on concerns on the original employment figures and heightened concerns now based on the upwards figures provided by Mrs. Evans.
But in terms of those figures, Mrs. Evans went back to the original figures, if you recall.
Went to the lower range,
the lower range
of her
yes
upwards revised figures, upwards from based on what was given in the original application. And so if the inspector agrees with us and our point that the on-site parking provision would be inadequate, that would be a conflict with policy DM33, as the needs of future occupants would not be met as is required under that policy.
Sorry, needs. What are you? Who are you defining as future occupants? Sorry to.
Well, people who be using the people who will be coming and driving in and working at the appeal scheme.
Occupants of the development site.
Yes.
Right. Sorry.
Yes. So I'll just repeat the question. If the inspector agrees with us that the on-site parking would be inadequate on site, that would be a conflict with that part of the policy.
If that were the case, but
Yes.
our evidence is quite clear on this, that we believe we have sufficient parking, and with the travel plan and the operational management plan that's in place, and that the controls around those two documents, we are confident that we are policy compliant in that respect.
Understood. And
Sorry, I do apologise.
I'll wait for you to jump in.
Yes, because I will, because I'm going to make it very clear to my learned friend, I'm not going to allow. If that submission is sought to be made by the Law 6 party, I will resist it with the strongest force, because there was no attempt to prosecute Mr. Dix on this point.
Understood. I thought you were about to jump in at some point as your line of questioning was on highways.
Conventional way is to challenge evidence if you want to make a submission of that nature, and there was no challenge to Mr. Dix's evidence.
There wasn't any challenge to Mr. Dix's evidence, so I understand the points that you're raising, and I've seen your evidence, but you didn't challenge Mr. Dix in relation to this, which is his evidence.
no, the points, I mean, as I set out at the start, the point is really just to set out the main aspects of the Rule 6 party's case that are in Mr. Sensecall's evidence, and really to put forward our position and look at what Mr. Sensecall's weight would be if you were to find us to be correct. That's the extent of what I'm doing. But yes, absolutely, I didn't cross-examine Mr. Dix on that.
Okay, any more questions on this topic that you think you need to ask that relate to Mr. Sensecall's evidence?
I had just one further point on parking provision, and I had a few short points on highways impacts, just again the same thread essentially of what Councillor Crabtree's evidence is, and the weight that Mr. Sensecall, and what would be open to you to conclude if you agreed with us.
Well,
is it based on Mr. Sensecall's evidence though, or is it based on his summary of Mr. Dix's evidence in his proof? Does that make sense?
I mean, I make it clear in my evidence that my analysis is based on the evidence of Mr. Dix. So,
yeah.
It is based on Mr. Dix's evidence, and then of course Mr. Sensecall as a planning witness, then he obviously takes that evidence and he gives weight and comments on it. So it really is going to the weight of that and Mr. Sensecall's appraisal of it.
Okay.
No. Sorry. It's not
Your
right.
mic's not on.
Challenge the weight.
Mr. White, your mic.
Sorry?
Your microphone.
Oh, I don't know if I even need it. No, Mum, it's very straightforward. These aren't complicated rules. It's of course open to my learned friend to challenge any element of our case, but she had the opportunity to, as did all the Rule 6 from Mr. Dix. She can't now seek to challenge Mr. Sensecall's weight when she's failed and her team failed to ask Mr. Dix about his views on parking. It's just not, it's not how it works. I mean, let's think about that proposition for a moment. You only turn up on the afternoon to give your closing speech, and you make all sorts of assertions which you haven't challenged in any way during the course of 16 or 15 days of evidence. You can't do that. We offered Mr. Dix, the Rule 6 party could have taken 3 days to cross-examine Mr. Dix if they'd so wished, and they didn't. So I'm sorry, it's not open in any way to seek to challenge that evidence, so to speak, through Mr. Sensecall. Of course, it would have been if Mr. Dix, these points had been put to Mr. Dix, but they weren't. And frankly, if the Rule 6 want to recall Mr. Dix, there'll be cost implications for applications, not implications. That opportunity, the timetable has not moved one jot since, frankly, you formulated it. And I'm going to take exactly the same line on any points put in relation to Mr. Smith. For whatever reason, the Rule 6 party chose not to ask Mr. Smith or Mr. Dix any questions, notwithstanding having evidence on it.
It is for you to ask questions on Mr. Sensecall's evidence, not what he's based his evidence on in terms of other witnesses. And if you did have questions for Mr. Dix on parking implications, overspill, that is for Mr. Dix, not. I understand what you're trying to understand. You're trying to explain the weighting, but by doing that, you're undoing the evidence. Does that make sense? You're sort of attacking Mr. Dix's evidence without him being here to defend it.
Understood. On that point, I did put the point to Miss Evans as well about the fact that she had revised her employment figures, and that did come out and through that evidence that hadn't been necessarily fed into the modelling. So I mean, you understand the extent of the exercise I'm trying to do. I have been careful in how I formulated it, and as I said, I understand we don't do the planning balance, but what I'm trying to do is essentially put forward the case that we've given, and take what Mr. Sensecall has given in terms of weight, and say, obviously, ma'am, the point is that each time if you disagree, then that weight might change.
Yeah,
and that is the colour
clear.
of the extent of my cross-examination. So it's.
Could you perhaps focus on areas where you have actually examined other witnesses rather than the witnesses that you haven't had the chance to cross-examine?
Yes, would that point also apply then, ma'am, to questions on modal split then and parking?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah. Because Mr. Sensecall hasn't given evidence on that.
Okay, that's understood. In terms of main issue H then, the effect on the living conditions of existing residents.
Yeah.
I don't see any problem in raising that point. I have some questions for Mr. Sensecall
No,
on
that's
that.
clearly been raised and we've had a round table on it. So any objections from you, Mr. White, in terms of residential amenity?
It depends on the questions, but we've had a session on that.
We have had a session on that, but Mr.
And
Sensecall does give
he
evidence
has.
on that.
He has, but it depends on the questions, because obviously we can't go back over issues we've already covered, but because I'm such a nice chap, I'll give the benefit of the doubt and let these questions go. Don't have robust skepticism, Mark.
There's no robust skepticism. Please continue.
Your own judgment, Mark.
Please continue, Mr. Evans.
So on main issue H then, living conditions of existing residents, you refer in your evidence at paragraph 8183 to local plan policy as being key to this aspect.
Well, there's the premise of the development plan, yes.
Yes, and just the point I'd like to focus on this question is the second part of that policy about contributing positively to making places better for people. And we
Sorry, which policy are we talking about?
CP9.
Oh, CP9.
Yes, and if it's easier, you summarise that at 8.183 of your evidence.
Yes.
It talks about contributing positively to making places better for people. And then at 184, you draw out policy DM35. And the part I'm going to look at with you is that part of the policy that talks about having a holistic understanding of the functions, qualities and characters of the proposed developments, natural and built, context and that policy discussing the need to avoid significant adverse impacts on amenities of neighbouring land and property. So your conclusion at paragraph 8.198 of your evidence, as far as I understand it, is that you don't consider there is any adverse impact at all on residential amenity. Is that your evidence?
I say there's no unacceptable material impact on residents' amenity.
And you look at paragraph 8.224, you discuss that the harms you see arising from the appeal scheme, and you mention landscape and visual impacts, and you say you don't accept that there are any other harms arising from the scheme. So then, just again, so I can understand it, is your evidence that there is no harm to residential amenity from the appeal scheme?
Well, it's as I've said there, it will not lead to an unacceptable material impact on residents' amenity.
But I don't think you've gone and fed that harm into you. That's not a harm that you've put into your table.
No,
do your planning
because it's not it isn't a harm.
You don't consider it to be a harm. And of course, you've heard our concerns on residential amenity raised in Councillor Crabtree's evidence in the round tables, concerns about lots of green space, noise from traffic, concerns about the impact on the Westhorpe Park Homes residents, in particular due to the nature of their prefabricated homes. And we've expressed concerns about whether mitigation planting would be adequate. And so if the inspector agrees with our case on the extent of harm to residential amenity, then that would be a harm that would have to be fed into the planning balance, contrary to your decision to leave it out.
Yes, it would, and I dealt with that at my paragraph 8.199, where I reference in this section the conclusions reached by officers of the council at the May committee.
Yes.
When they concluded that there would be moderate harm to which moderate negative weight is attributed. And what I say there is, if the inspector doesn't agree with my assessment, the other assessment she has before her is that from the case officer. And even if she attaches the same weight as he does, in the balance, it's not sufficient to change my view as to where the balance lies, i.e. in favour of a decision to approve the scheme.
But the inspector would put this into her balance if she agrees with our.
And that's why I couched it in those terms in my evidence, so that it's clear that if the inspector isn't with me, there is an alternative way in which she can assess this.
Thank you. That's
based on evidence.
Thank you. If we move then on to the need case, paragraph 8.96 of your proof. .96 of your proof. This paragraph makes clear that your need case obviously relies on the evidence of the appellant's 5 expert witnesses in this regard.
Absolutely, it does. You know, I'm the planning witness here. My role is hopefully to take all the evidence that my team has produced and to come to a view as to where the overall planning balance lies.
Yes.
But I'm not the need expert.
No. And based on your assessment of the evidence and how it's played out at this inquiry, your position is and remains, isn't it, that the appellant has demonstrated a continuing strong demand for additional studio space of the calibre of Marlowe's. That's your position in light of that need evidence.
I say that we have made out our need case
and that's
in support of this scheme as submitted. Yes.
And that's the basis for your allocation of substantial weight on that point.
Absolutely.
And so again, similar question, if based on what we've heard over the course of this inquiry and the Rule 6 parties' position on need, if the inspector agrees with us that the need case is not made out, she would then attribute less than the substantial weight that you're inviting.
That would be open to her if that's the view that she comes to, depending on what weight she gives to your evidence. Yes.
Then looking then the question of economic benefits, you cover this at 8.236 in your proof.
Yes,
Again, you give substantial weight to economic benefits.
I do.
And there is a relationship, isn't there, Mr. Sensecall, between the need case and the economic benefits?
There's a relationship, but I think it's absolutely right that we've separated them out.
Yes, and one follows naturally true from
Yes,
the other because it's sort of an obvious point. But of course, if the need case isn't made out because the market doesn't need this studio or doesn't need a studio of this scale, it won't provide the extent of the benefits that the appellant says would flow from that scheme as just a logical point.
that's a logical point. Not one with which I agree in terms of the substantive issues, but
Understood.
Yes.
So then if we just look at the points that you draw out then on the need case, and the best paragraph there is 8.246, where you list a number of benefits, number of social benefits here.
Well, they're the social benefits of the scheme, not the economic benefits per se. The economic benefits are summarised at 8.236. Didn't you say 246?
Ah, yes, sorry, I meant to say 8.236. Thank you, that's correct.
Sorry.
And so if the inspector agrees with our case that the need isn't made out, it would also be open to her to agree with our case that the extent of the economic benefits portrayed by the appellant are not achievable in the extent set out in the evidence and as summarised by yourself at 8.236.
Well, it's the same point, isn't it, that I've given in response to all the questions that you've asked me. Look, we are absolutely clear. I'm absolutely clear as to our case and where the balance lies. But the inspector's job is to assess all the evidence that she's received from all the parties and to come to a view.
Then looking at the social benefits, we go back down then to 8. Sure, I think I took you first, 8.246. We've already touched on the extent of the recreational uses, so I won't go back over that. The last point I'll raise is in relation to the community building. Then you'll recall Councillor Crabtree's evidence on the community building and the Route 6 party's position that the parish council is already managing 2 community buildings, and so Councillor Crabtree's evidence is that this doesn't provide an additional benefit, as that benefit is already being met through those existing buildings. So I just wanted to understand, you've not put forward, I haven't seen it as part of the case that there is a pressing need for an additional community building. That's not how the appellant has alighted on that extra proposed facility, is it?
No, but what there is a facility that yes is available to the immediate population if they want to use it, but also there's a wider benefit to the wider community by the nature of that facility and its links to the film studio and access there too. So I still maintain that there is a public social benefit to that provision.
Thank you, Mr. Sensecall. That was all I had for you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any interested parties objecting would like to ask questions? Okay. Just one from me. And we talked about if the development was not inappropriate, so it met 155, the whole of 155. And then you said that there would still need to be harm ascribed to the impact on openness. But it's my understanding, and I could be wrong, that if something's not inappropriate, then you don't undertake any assessment of the impact on openness because it's not inappropriate development.
Interesting point.
So I'm just looking to understand your point.
Okay. When you say it's your understanding, sorry, I shouldn't be asking you questions. With all due respect, no, based on,
So if something's not inappropriate development,
yeah,
then it's not inappropriate. You would just go on to then undertake a normal section 78 in an appeal circumstance assessment. You would look at the other harms, but you wouldn't then obviously, you wouldn't assess the impact on, unless there was a requirement within the exceptions, for example, a greater impact on openness, so there would need to be an assessment. But if there is that requirement in 155, do you want to?
If I may give my view, and Mr. Bird, look at footnote 55.
Is this to do with the changes?
No,
No,
if you look at para 153.
hang on.
Yeah. If you look at para 153.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see it says, when considering any planning application, local planning authorities should ensure that substantial weight is given to any harm to the greenbelt, including harm to its openness.
Yep.
Footnote 55, other than in the case on development on PDL or grey-belt land, where development is not inappropriate. And I think
That's where
Mr. Sensecall was wondering about your source. I'm
Yep.
making a presumption that that is your source.
yeah, is that that I'm on my previous understanding before the introduction of grey belt was if it's not inappropriate, you would not assess the effect upon openness. But this could have changed now. You can
Yeah. Can I make a point again? I think, Ma'am, you do.
happy if I got it
You
wrong.
have to consider its effect on openness, but you're not required to give substantial weight to it if footnote 55 is in play. You could conclude it's substantial harm to openness, but I think there is an element of discretion by the policy, by 153. So I think you do need to consider harm to openness. Say you're not required to find the harm substantial because of footnote 55, although it's open to you to do so.
which is why I said significant rather
Yeah.
than substantial.
Because of the change.
Yes.
Understood. Okay. I'm going to have another look at the inspector training manual on that.
But there could be another
Any views from
amendment.
you, Mr. Bird?
Madam, I would agree with that. In terms of footnote 55, it's directed at the substantial weight element of 153. So it's saying you don't, as a matter of the default position is not substantial weight. It's a matter of judgment what weight you give to the effect on openness in the context here.
Yeah. It's
I
not,
think it's
but it's
what I
not
agree
saying
with
you
Mr.
you
Sensecall.
don't consider openness.
Yeah.
Anything from you, Ms. Nevin?
Agreed, nothing further.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. Re-examination, any questions, Mr. White?
Yes, I just have three questions, Mr. Sensible. Could you first of all, please, do you remember you had a debate with my learned friend about Arup and evidence, and the point was put to you, well, of course, about the consideration and the purposes. Do you remember that?
I do.
I just want to go back, please. Could you take up CD 941, which is the Arup study?
Sorry, it's all a bit slow, but it's just
Yeah.
opening now.
When it opens up, could you go to 1.1, please? On its page 1.
Yes.
Do you see a sentence beginning? Arup has been appointed by the Buckinghamshire authorities
Yes.
to undertake a greenbelt assessment to form part of a shared evidence base for forthcoming local plans in each of the 4 Bucks districts.
That's what it says. Yes.
And then if we go, please, to page 58. sorry, not 58, page 44. Actually, no, sorry. Actually, yeah, you can go to page 44. That's easy. That shows the Buckinghamshire Greenbelt.
Sorry, is that PDF page 44?
No, it's the one below page 44. It is a map, a plan of the areas which shows, as it says, the Buckinghamshire Greenbelt.
I'm there, yeah.
And what we know is that there's in the north, there's a tiny nib of Aylesbury Vale district, which is in the Greenbelt.
Yes.
And then we go a bit below Aylesbury in the southeast of Aylesbury. Then we see the extent in Wickham district, and one can identify Marlow within Wickham district's administrative area.
Yes.
Bordering on Maidenhead and Windsor, I think. And then we've got Chiltern district and South Bucks district.
Yeah, I see that.
Now, in answer to Mr. Bird, you made a point about the weightings given. To what extent were they comparative in the extent that the study appears to be across the four authorities and the extent of the Greenbelt identified on page 45?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, Mark.
Yeah,
Sorry.
absolutely. What do you say about the weightings that were concluded on the contribution to purposes, in the knowledge that what the authors looked at was across the four authorities and the extent of Greenbelt?
I think, and I tried to say this in response to Mr. Bird. The context is different. We're dealing here at a whole district level, on larger swathes of land, and what we're dealing with as far as the appeal is concerned is a particular site. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not,
Well,
but
don't worry about that. Next point, please. Could you take up the MPPF?
yeah, yes.
And could you go to paragraph 86, please? And I just want to deal, please, with the question of existing need and future need, please. When in 86A, it says planning policy should set out a clear economic vision strategy which positively and proactively encourage sustainable economic growth.
Yes.
Is it your judgment in being proactive to proactively encourage sustainable economic growth that includes or does not include future need if you're being proactive?
It includes, especially with regards to the fact that, yes, we're talking here about the policy position.
Next, could you look at 87A?
Yes.
And again, think about the concept that new, expanded or upgraded facilities and infrastructure that are needed to support the growth of these industries. In your judgment, is that exclusive to existing need or need in the future if you're contemplating the growth of those industries?
Well, looking again now at the first two lines of 87, where it's talking about policies and decisions. I mean, policies are not just about the here and now; they're about the plan period. So in that respect, it has to be the here and now, but also future decisions.
Well, just tell me, let's imagine the proposition that it's only now, to what extent would that be proactive in your judgment or reactive to future growth?
If it's only now, and it's an application, it would be reactive.
Thank you. Then can we go to 155, please?
Yes.
And you know, in relation to 155B, it said there is a demonstrable unmet need for the type of the development proposed. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then do you see footnote 56?
Yes.
Which in the need of applications involving the provision of housing, and I haven't lost my marbles, I know we're not dealing with housing, but it says it means the lack of a 5-year supply of deliverable housing sites. Is a 5-year supply looking at the past or the future?
It's looking at the present and the future.
Exactly. So again, in terms of existing need and future need, is the footnote in 155B, in your view, looking at present need alone or present need plus future need across a 5-year period?
It must be right that it's both. It's present and the future need.
Then can I just ask you this? You've been when were you instructed? The third and final point. When were you instructed in this matter?
Late summer.
And when do you think? When did you
Last
start negotiations with Mr. Fannin? When was Mr. Fannin aware, as far as you can recall? And I don't need to be precise. When did you first make contact with Mr. Fannin and start talking about the case?
I would guess. Well, after the appeal was lodged, which was September, so from September onwards.
Yeah. And it's between September and you giving evidence today, did Mr. Fannin or anyone else from the council ask you to supply the information that Mr. Bird asked you about, i.e. the evidence of how the actual, not the actual alternative sites exercise was done, but the actual site selection? Have you seen any correspondence or request for that to be provided by the LPA?
No.
Have you seen historically in the files that you've read that this was a matter that the LPA sought from the appellants previously? Do you know?
I don't know. I mean, I've read the files, but you know, there's a lot of information, but I've not seen anything.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mum. That's my re-examination. And that extraordinarily concludes the appellant's case in this matter.
I was just about to say the same thing.
Oh, sorry.
Lose the formal evidence.
So I didn't mean to.
It's my inquiry, not yours, Mr. White.
It's not doing well today.
Okay. Right. Should we take a short adjournment, or do you want to just crack straight on? Do you want to relocate them?
What, should I relocate?
Well, or you can stay there. It's up to you.
Well, it might be sensible for me to be next to Mr.
Mr. Andrews.
Why don't we have a couple of minutes? Just
Let's have a couple of minutes.
Right.
It's 15:42. Should we come back at 10 to? Is that okay with everybody? Yep. No one's replying, so we're coming back at 10 to. We're adjourned until then. Thank you.